Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Rare Conversations. Thanks for joining today's chat. I'm Natalia Payne, Senior Manager of Food Programming for Rare's Climate Culture team. For those who have attended Rare Conversations in the past, thank you so much for coming back. If this is your first time joining us, it's a virtual series where we speak with leaders building a more sustainable world. Previously, we've had guests like Stacey Roberts Steele from Yellow Dot Studios, Wendy Paulson and Paul Butler, Kiss the Ground founder Rylan Engelhart, and former president of Costa Rica, Carlos Alvarado. You can revisit those and all our past Rare Conversations at rare.org/rare-conversations. Today, I'm honored to welcome Annie Ryu, the CEO and founder of Jackfruit Company and Jack and Annie's, a top plant-based meat brand which is supporting small farmers while giving North Americans delicious and convenient ways to eat more sustainably. For over 10 years, she's worked relentlessly to popularize jackfruit as a groundbreaking meat alternative, pioneering the world's leading jackfruit supply chain. The company's farm to fork supply chain supports over 1,700 farming families, providing 10 to 40% of their income, and delivers jackfruit to the US with a 94% lower carbon footprint versus conventional beef. Annie has been recognized as Ford 30 Under 30, Top Woman in Grocery, an Unreasonable Fellow, a Young Gun by Frozen Refrigerated Buyer, and Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year for Mountain West. So Annie, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Really happy to be here.
There are so many different angles to what we could talk about today, but I wanted to start out a little bit with, how did you get here? What inspired you to transition from public health into being an entrepreneur in the food industry? And can you just share a little bit of the story behind founding Jack and Annie's and the Jackfruit Company?
Of course, it started really with a passion for global health. So I was a pre-medical student. I started a health tech company with my brother, was working in India and stumbled across a jackfruit on my first day. I got invited to a jackfruit festival my first weekend. And, festivals have been going on for more than a decade at this point, but the whole purpose of them is to celebrate this amazing natural resource, jackfruit, and to try to get it better connected to a market. Working in global health across Latin America and then India, what I kept seeing was that poverty was the root cause of everything that I was trying to solve. So jackfruit, being the highest yielding tree crop in the world, drought resistant, thriving all over India without any inputs, without any maintenance, was basically money growing on trees that farmers would be able to access if we could actually build the supply chains to get it to market. So that was really the impetus for starting the company. I didn't have any experience in the food business at the time, as a pre-med and undergrad. So then it was trying to figure out like what kind of foods are we going to like commercialize to bring to consumers that will really solve a problem for consumers. So in India, there are numerous recipes with jackfruit, and there are also numerous stages of the crop that are enjoyed and consumed. And so one of the farmers introduced me to the stage of jackfruit that has been enjoyed as a meat alternative for hundreds of, if not thousands of years, because it's so similar to meat. And that was just getting a chance to taste that part of that stage of the jackfruit, and a burger actually that one of the farmers made for me completely blew me away. I had no idea that a plant could possibly be so meaty just the way it grows. And so then really focused in on the meat alternative category. Like as somebody who grew up in Minnesota, I didn't grow up thinking that it was very feasible to be vegetarian. Like meat was such a huge staple of the way that we ate growing up. And so I started to explore the meat alternative category after I was introduced to jackfruit, and just saw, a huge gap and a huge opportunity for something as simple and delicious as jackfruit is. And, going back to the whole aspect of public health, I would say that, nutrition is something that hasn't been as central to a lot of medicine as it should be, given that dietary risk factors are the leading contributor to morbidity and mortality, above smoking now, and that will only continue to be the case. And so we really have to be very concerned about what we are eating from a health perspective. And of course, we think about why we're here today, and kind of the other big one of the other big issues that we're addressing with the company is like if we have no planet to live on, it's not really good if we're able to live longer. So we have to solve that piece of the puzzle as well, which is a big focus for us too.
Definitely. And it sounds like before you were introduced to jackfruit, you didn't really know jackfruit. I imagine most people that are tuned in are not, jackfruit mega fans, but may not actually know very much about jackfruit. Can you tell us a bit about like how is it grown? Why is it good food to eat? Obviously, you mentioned that some stages can provide a good meat substitute, but like tell us a little bit about jackfruit. Like why should we be into it?
Yes. Well, hopefully some of you are already mega fans of jackfruit. Um, but yeah, it's a crop that is more similar to meat, just the way it grows than any other crop. And so I actually thought it would be fun to show a picture on screen because I think, part of what's really well understood about jackfruit is like that huge green spiky piece, but I just wanted to show a picture of like, the stage of jackfruit that we use, right? And so this is like jackfruit that we've peeled and we put some sauce on, right? And so when I say it's more similar to meat than any other plant, like that's what I mean, right? And we think about, mushrooms are meaty, and some people feel like eggplant is meaty. Cauliflower, we could have cauliflower wings, and it's sort of the same, but like there really isn't a plant that is so similar to meat. And so what we've been doing is building all of the systems to make that available to people to be able to enjoy in place of foods typically made with beef, pork, chicken, or seafood. We can make instead with jackfruit and enable people to eat more plants, right? And I think like plant-based meat has become a little bit of confused terminology depending on how much you're familiar with the space. But no one ever said we shouldn't be eating as much fruits and vegetables. And ultimately, like jackfruit is, by species of fruit. People in India consider the stage that we use a vegetable just because it's, kind of more so used that way. But I think fundamentally, it's this plant that enables us to enjoy meat, but get more of what we should be eating into our diets, just plants. So when you saw that picture of it, part of what's apparent is like that sinuous nature of animal muscle. And so that sort of corresponds to jackfruit's high fiber content and also the fact that it has that juiciness of meat, but without any of the fat or saturated fat. So compared with meat, like those are some of the big attributes. The average American gets less than half the amount of fiber we're supposed to have on a daily basis. One of the big reasons we're supposed to be eating more plants, because of fiber found in the cell wall of plants. And so jackfruit really delivers that. And a lot of the reason we're supposed to be eating less red meat from a health perspective is the saturated fat, the cholesterol. So of course, jackfruit has no saturated fat or cholesterol. It's also low in calories as a fruit, has various different vitamins and minerals. So really stellar from a nutritional perspective, also from a taste perspective. One of the things to note is, ripe jackfruit is found in a number of grocery stores these days. Ripe jackfruit is rumored to have inspired the flavor of juicy fruit. So as you could imagine, that means it's like, pretty sweet and fruity. The jackfruit that we use is before any of the sugars have developed, so it's not sweet at all, and it takes up the flavor of whatever it's prepared with. So it's kind of like a totally different animal at that stage. Yeah, I mean it can taste just like beef or pork or chicken or seafood. So from a taste perspective, it's pretty amazing. It's more neutral than tofu to start with. And then from a sustainability perspective, so as you mentioned at the beginning, we've done a life cycle analysis, and we know that our jackfruit's carbon footprint is 94% lower than beef's. And I think there's plants are not all created equal in terms of what are the inputs that are required. And one of the things that's just amazing about jackfruit is how incredibly sustainable it is. So it is the highest yielding tree crop in the world. It's drought resistant, thriving without any inputs, without any maintenance. And, that is, tied to the fact of I was explaining the jackfruit festivals, right, and the fact that people were trying to get it better connected to a market. So it has just been thriving for all this time without inputs, because why would a farmer pay to put inputs on something they're not going to be able to sell? And so now it's more like an ingrained reality. You don't have to put anything on the jackfruit. One of the other things to note is as an open pollination crop, every single tree is genetically different. And so it is something that is celebrated for how it contributes to biodiversity. Of course, that makes for challenges for us as a company, making sure that we can preserve that and simultaneously deliver on the quality, consistency, expectations of the marketplace. But that's something that we've learned how to do over time.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that. I know, I feel like in the food system, so much has gone towards monoculture and even just like clones of the same thing because it makes it easier, maybe from a supply chain side, but it's not beneficial from the environmental side. I want to get to consumers in a second, but I'm interested, you feels like this kind of started in you recognizing that so many of the health issues are from lack of income, and actually you're working really closely to support local communities that are already growing jackfruit. Can you tell me a little bit about, how you work with those communities and what you've learned from the small scale farmers through the process that might be interesting to others and applicable to others who are trying to support local producers?
Yeah. So we are harvesting jackfruit that was already available, already growing, that just didn't have a connection to the marketplace. And so we are contributing 10 to 40% of the annual income for all the farming families that we work with. And that's entirely incremental to what they were making before. And so the idea of there being a jackfruit farmer, jackfruit farmers per se don't really exist, because that would have been, farming something that they're not able to sell. So these are farmers who farm other things, who happen to have jackfruit because the jackfruit itself is so helpful for a healthy ecosystem. So it's used as a shade crop, it's used as a border crop, it's used, it's intercropped with various different crops. And so farmers of other things happen to have jackfruit, and we partner with thousands of small farmers to harvest the jackfruit that we prepare and make our foods with. In terms of working with small farmers, I mean, and India is halfway around the world. And while I've been there 35 times, like I'm still, not remotely fluent in all the local languages, or, the local culture. So, we have a team on the ground that is based there. We have a fully owned subsidiary in India. And so we have, employees who have grown up there who, work closely with our team and who sort of more fundamentally understand all of the dynamics and nuances. But I think one of the things that, sort of going back to the quality control piece that we've learned as an organization is like, I think, coming from the US to India and trying to, make utilize all of this local knowledge, we've also realized like we have to have a supply chain that is driven by the demands of customers and consumers, right? Because as much as the heart and soul is around like helping the farmers, it's a consumer products company, and that's like how it is a successful business. And if it's a successful business, we're going to be able to work with many more farmers. And if it's not, we're going to work with zero farmers. And so having to, bring in the systems, like develop and implement the systems across this global supply chain to ensure that every product is up to the standards of the US marketplace. Even though where we're starting, we don't necessarily have access to all the infrastructure and systems that we have here. So that's been part of the learning through the process.
Yeah, that's really cool. And the perfect transition for where I want to go into talking about consumers. Feels like there's so many benefits and so many interesting things you could teach people about jackfruit, but that's probably, would have to make your packaging huge for someone to take in all this information. I want to jump back to the poll that we opened with, that because I'm sure people are curious about the answer. So According to Rare's research, about 1 in 3 Americans say they're trying to eat less beef. And in the past, we've done similar studies about meat in general, and it was also around 1 in 3. So what do you think your customers' motivations are for getting your products? Do you think they want to be healthier? You mentioned like all the fiber and nutrients and different than avoiding saturated fat. Do you think they prefer the taste when they end up trying it and they just opt for that reason? Do you think they're, coming in about climate? Like, what is bringing people to your products, do you think?
Yeah, and I'll look at it in two levels. So one, like why are people choosing plant-based meat? And then for people choosing plant-based meat, why are they choosing us? So the biggest drivers for plant-based meat, one is health concerns. So people are trying to cut back on meat for health reasons, trying to eat more plants for health reasons. Second is concerns about climate change. And so I think that, there are a lot of reports out there that say consumers are actually not willing to pay more for things that, help the climate. I mean, the reality is that, plant-based meat is more expensive than animal meat today. We don't remotely have the kinds of economies of scale that the animal meat industry has been able to develop over all this time. But consumers are concerned about climate change and do want to make a positive difference. And that is a big part of what has driven interest in plant-based meat. So those are the top two drivers to the category, third being animal welfare. In terms of consumers who have already decided to buy plant-based meat, why are they choosing Jack and Annie's? Consumers are looking for something that tastes really good. So actually one of the detractors from plant-based meat as a category, detractors from its growth has been consumers not being satisfied with the taste and texture of the foods. We have, prepared foods thanks to Jackfruit's naturally meaty texture that really delight our consumers. And so I think a lot of people choose it for taste. And then a lot of consumers choose it because it is simpler in ingredients. It's, first and foremost jackfruit. It's primarily, based off of this crop. And so it's easier to understand because I think that a lot of consumers also have had concern and confusion about like, wait, how are you actually getting to a meaty texture? And in this case, it just takes learning a little bit about jackfruit to understand precisely how we got to meaty texture. And beyond that, we do look to make our foods as affordable as possible. Jack and Annie's is sold frozen. We have frozen logistics and lack of economies of scale, so it's a little bit more expensive, but it's not a super premium. So I would say those are all factors for why people choose us versus some of the other things that are available once someone's come to the category.
Awesome. Yeah, that's really cool and awesome to hear. You break it down into those two parts of like why are they coming to the category and why are they coming to you within the category. You mentioned earlier almost like it's your job to create a product that people want to buy because you want to be supporting these small scale farmers, but if no one wants to buy it, you're back in the problem that they started with. So what do you consider and what factors, like what is your process when developing a new product to make sure that customers are actually going to want to buy them?
Yeah, always an interesting thing when trying to kind of pioneer a new space and pioneer a new category. Meat alternatives in totality have been around for a while. If you think about tofu, for example, but a lot of the foods that are more so trying to directly replace meat, and you don't have to know how to, make tofu taste good. You could just heat up these, sausage patties. Like that's relatively newer, and definitely a lot of consumers are getting a chance to try these foods for the first time, whereas previously the audience was more so limited to vegans and vegetarians. So, the big issue that first needs to be tackled is like, giving consumers what they want. And so how do you figure out what it is that they want, as you're asking, like looking at market data, market research. Although again, some of it is a little bit limited just based off the category not having been around for as long. Like if I were going to try to find market research about what do people want from jackfruit, it just doesn't exist. There's also looking at consumption data in retail stores. Like what products that are available in retail stores are selling well, what new launches have worked well, what new launches have failed. And you could see some of the information you want to see from like just store data about like what's selling, and some of it you need to go pair with like going into the store and seeing, okay, this brand is selling well because its packaging stands out, or it's selling well because when you pick it up, it feels like a good buy. And so it's kind of triangulating all these different types of inputs to understand what's really going on. And then, for us, we're introducing a completely new crop, right? And so jackfruit, when I started the company, was virtually unknown with all of our customers and consumers. It's much better known now. But there's still that unfamiliarity factor, and it's still, a percentage of Jack and Annie's consumers who realize that Jack is jackfruit, and not a person, and what jackfruit really is. So with introducing jackfruit and this being a naturally meaty plant and that being such a fundamental part of our point of difference, like we do want to make sure that, as people, fully realize that the food formats that we're in are things that are familiar and accessible. Jackfruit has been enjoyed as a meat alternative for hundreds, if not thousands of years, but we're not going to try to get people to change the behavior and start eating Sri Lankan jackfruit curries tomorrow and, expect that's going to, fly off the shelves, even though that would be, one of the many authentic recipes. Like, we're making jackfruit available and accessible in the ways that people are already consuming food. So, people are buying frozen, chicken nuggets and burgers and sausage patties and meatballs. So, and in, high proportions. So we're going to make, jackfruit available to people there. So they get, not expecting, complete, huge behavior change all at once. We're not, a remotely big enough company to try to drive that, but helping people shift their behaviors in a positive way.
Amazing. And I'm definitely going to look up jackfruit Sri Lankan curry because that sounds right up my alley. Excited to check that out later.
Nice.
What do you see? So you have like tons of data in the space, or like living it, breathing it. What do you see the future of plant-based foods in the next 5, 10 years? Like, what's going on in the market? What's to come in your view?
Well, plant-based dairy, like plant-based milk, for example, versus plant-based meat, they're in two very different spaces right now. So plant-based milk, I think a lot of us enjoy it, consume it without thinking of the fact that it's plant-based. It just is our milk of choice. That's the one that's in the refrigerator. That's the one that's at Starbucks. That's just always the one we pick. And whereas, so that's 15% of dairy milk right now, whereas plant-based milk is closer to 1%. And so plant-based meat is on the path to, becoming the 15%, but it needs to overcome some hurdles first in terms of consumer acceptance, product development, improving the taste and texture in total for the category, making it more accessible from a pricing perspective, making it easier to understand for consumers in terms of what it's made of, how it's made, making sure that it's really delivering on those nutritional benefits of plants that consumers are expecting if they're choosing plant-based. So that's, part of this journey from where we are today. Food trends usually that happen in Europe kind of come to the US later. And part of what is happening in Europe right now is plant-based meat is picking up steam again. So we'll see that before too long in the US. And then just thinking longer term, the younger generations are more and more concerned about climate change. And so we'll definitely see really strong growth as that age group actually gets more purchasing power over time.
Love that. Okay, we're going to go into Q&A in a minute here, but I want to do a quick lightning round. So just some questions, you can shoot back answers. It's summertime. We're probably all either going on vacation or been on vacation. What's your favorite summer vacation spot?
I've not been on vacation yet, but I go wherever the friends and family are.
Awesome. Are you more salty or more sweet?
Salty. Yeah, I need that sustenance.
Nice. What's your top condiment?
I will argue for avocado.
Ooh, is it a condiment? Interesting. Tell us in the chat, people. What is the last show you binge watched?
It hasn't happened.
No binge watching, too busy looking at market trends and
No
all that
binge
good
watching.
stuff. If other people have great shows that they've been binge watching, put those in the chat. Currently, for me, just the Olympics right now, because Lord knows there's enough content there to watch all day. If you could learn any skill instantly, what would it be?
As someone who used to be a dedicated classical violinist, the question that this would be instant is I would be as good as I was and better without practicing. That would be great.
Wouldn't that be a dream, right?
That would be a dream.
We are going to transition to questions in a second, but Annie, where can we find your products? Where can we learn more about Jackfruit and your story?
The websites definitely tell more of the story than the package, which is great. You have a little bit more space, but I would recommend going to Whole Foods, Sprouts. Nationally, they carry the widest assortment of our items. You can use a store locator to find the store nearest you. Imperfect Foods also sells online. Smash Burger nationally, if you would like to have someone else make the burger for you. Those I'd recommend.
Awesome. And I think, yeah, Stephanie just added those links in the chat, so have a look. And if you want to learn more about Rare's approach to securing food systems and our work driving plant-rich diets, Stephanie's also going to add links for that. And as always, follow us on social media and sign up for Rare's newsletter so you don't miss any of our future Rare conversations. And with that, let's see what the audience has wanted to know. So first question, what are your thoughts on educating more corporate leaders about plant-based food, scope 3 emissions reductions? And are you finding your role as a leader in the space helps you spread the word to keep corporate decision makers? Heading into climate weeks, there's so much opportunity to shift.
I was on a panel speaking about this with executives of large food companies a few weeks ago. So there definitely are those opportunities. And I think I'm headed to New York to do something similar soon. I would say, a lot of these large corporations do have goals for emissions reduction. So one of the ways that we are looking to help to improve total results is just to be a solution as a supplier. So I do think, yes, there's a role as being a thought leader. You, of course, need to be invited to these events. So there's that it takes that openness to start with, and it takes, getting your name and your work out there. So always happy to share more about what we're doing and how it can be a solution to any of those opportunities. And one of the things that's been really great is seeing how many customers do have sustainability commitments and goals so that we can be a solution for them in that realm, as well as just providing, delicious, nutritious food.
Awesome. Love that. And yeah, something I've been thinking is like all your customers are also decision makers in different areas of life. So hopefully if people are trying your products at home, but they're also in charge of maybe corporate food, like they can transition that over. A second question, how could a behavior change organization like Rare help you when it comes to helping consumers be more open to a meat substitute?
Yeah, I mean, I know, Rare's work is so expansive and it is such a powerhouse team at Rare. Like it's amazing what each person is able to do there, having gotten to see some of that firsthand. So I think, there is this aspect of just helping consumers to make that connection between food and climate. So there are various different initiatives that Rare has, trying to help, create that education, or just create that awareness in ways that don't feel like education. It's been interesting seeing the ways that the food industry and climate change mitigation like aren't nearly as overlapping as they should be, given that agriculture is contributing, it's like depending on who's calculating, 1/4 or 1/3 of global emissions. Like it's massive, and it's not being talked about nearly enough, right? It's as much as the global transportation industry. So I think like helping consumers to understand that, and like helping to get these foods in front of people, I would say is another piece. So that's part of why we love a partnership like we have with Smashburger is like I can't tell you how many people will say, oh, like I went to the store and couldn't find your foods. And it's like, no, they carry 10 of our items. And it's just like people don't know where to find these items in stores. And so just like I remember when I first went to a store to try to find like meat alternatives, also struggled. And so just like creating that access, whether that's like opting to serve different plant-based options at a team gathering, just having that partnership with whoever's the catering group, like we're gonna make these options available and they're not, you know, taking out some of the factors of like, well, I don't know if I'll like it or I don't know how to prepare it well. I don't even know, I couldn't even find it at the store, right? Just like these foods are delicious. And if people can actually get a chance to try it, a lot of people's minds will be changed and you give them a chance to change their choices going forward too.
Yeah, and I love what you said of like, yeah, where do you even find it in the store? Because in my view, as things are transitioning from foods that predominantly vegetarians and vegans are trying, which are like, in their own cupboard in some weird corner in the grocery store, to something open to all of us who are trying to eat less meat. It's like, where do you place things? Do they go in the vegetarian section or do they go right next to the other chicken nuggets? It's just from a different source, right? One question from the audience
Yeah.
is, what do you think about big beef and big meat stepping into the plant-based space? So obviously there's a lot of young companies that are starting from just plant-based, but you also see big meat companies that are either buying up smaller startups or starting their own plant-based arm of what they're offering. How do you feel about that? What do you think's interesting going on there?
A lot of the large meat companies tried to enter the plant-based space, and we're not successful in doing so. So I think there are that points to multiple issues. I mean, was it because consumers didn't trust an item that was ultimately coming from one of the meat giants? Like that was probably part of it. Certainly not exclusively the issue. Like I think a lot of those products were maybe surprisingly, R&D was really underinvested in relative to, the quality that needed to be there for consumers to buy it. And you kind of almost wonder, is it in some of these cases, the perception that, vegans and vegetarians are willing to sacrifice on taste and texture, that it was just like, okay, this is good enough to put in the marketplace. And it really wasn't, right? Like it wasn't something that was ready for prime time, ready to delight consumers. And so for various reasons, most of those undertakings by the large beef, companies, meat suppliers failed. In terms of, those companies acquiring smaller companies to be able to get into the space, it comes with opportunity and it comes with risk. One of the large meat companies had acquired a plant-based company, for over $100 million and, decided earlier this year to just shut it down. And that had to do with, internal things going on within that corporation. And also the fact that at their scale, $100 million drop in the bucket. And like, that's a crazy thing to think about relative to, the blood, sweat, and tears that it took for that founder and that whole team to build that company from the ground up. So opportunity, right, is the idea that whether it's a meat company or some large, multinational conglomerate, one of the biggest CPGs, like, you have an army in sales, you have an army in marketing, you have your own distribution network, you have your own manufacturing, right? You have all of these scale efficiencies, you have the total enterprise to scale something quickly and strongly. And like that's something that we won't have. Like we will not be as big as the established giants that have been around for 100 years. Like that's those are all things that we would benefit from having access to. But again, at the same time, it's like, there it comes with risks of does somebody just really not see what this enterprise can become within that organization, and they just see it as, a line on the P&L and don't prioritize it because it's not yet at the scale of the things that have, been the bread and butter of the business for 100 years.
Yeah, it's like we want more alternatives in more places. So having that scale is huge. But like you said, since there's less investment in making it the most delicious thing because they have 50 other products that are all animal protein, maybe they're not investing as much in it tasting or the texture and everything there. And like, then you might end up with a consumer who tries something, doesn't like it, and just goes back to another thing versus trying your products who've been tested and tested because it's your bread and butter. Yeah, very interesting. Love that question. We have a lot of questions coming in just about, okay, how do we prepare jackfruit? Like, what do I do? Should I be like, if I want to buy your products, how do I do that? If I want to buy a jackfruit as a whole thing in the store or in a different form, like, can I freeze it? They're quite large. Like,
Yeah.
what should I do? What are your favorite dishes? All of that.
Yeah. Well, part of the reason that jackfruit was going so much to waste at the beginning is that it does have a fairly short shelf life, and it is, once it's been harvested, and it's labor intensive to prepare. So, um, if you're going to buy a whole jackfruit at the store, it's going to take some time. So be ready for that. And yes, you would need to freeze some of it, most likely, unless you're throwing a party. But I would also say that the jackfruit you'll find at the store is generally like whole jackfruits. Like it's not the right stage of jackfruit to make the meat alternative from. Like it is the kind that you would like eat as a sweet ripe fruit. Like you'll take the yellow bulbs and eat them as a sweet ripe fruit. Whereas the jackfruit that we're using, that's most similar to meat, is actually months earlier in development on the tree and is not available in retail because of the short shelf life after harvesting and the fact of like needing to know how to prepare it and that being fairly intensive. So, um, yeah, I would say, uh, our recommendation, unbiased recommendation, would be to buy our foods. And we have the Jackfruit Company brand, and we have some new innovation coming out there. And similarly, Jack and Annie's. And if there are items that you don't see that you would like, feel free to shoot us a note, and we'll see if we can make that happen.
Awesome. And yeah, that's really good intel of just like, don't buy a big jackfruit expecting it to be the savory meat alternative that you might have tried in other forms because they're more ripe and more fruit-like than vegetable-like at that point. Because I could see myself accidentally buying a jackfruit and be like, oh, I'll just do it like I've done these pulled pork taco vibe things and be like, oh, much more on the sweet and the sour side of things. Next question. In working with producers, so those that are growing jackfruit, how do you find the farmers that you're working with and what are you looking for? Are there specific sustainable practices? Is there a certain number of trees or pounds of product that they're kind of creating each month? What are your kind of criteria there?
Yeah, well, we are sourcing in southern India primarily. And so for us, we do have a network of farmers that is like beyond what we're able to currently buy from, just in terms of the, volumes that we need to buy. I mean, it's amazing how abundant the fruit is on these trees. And like if the jackfruit tree itself were a little less high yielding, we would get to work with more farmers. So that's sort of like the pros and cons. But I would say, it's interesting in India early on in our work there, the Minister of Agriculture reached out to me and was like, did you know that jackfruit is the only entirely organic crop in all of India? And it's just because, like, again, it's native, it's super abundant. There wasn't really a connection to a market for it. So people just are enjoying it. And there's not a reason to spend money to put stuff on it. So I think like organic is something that is the default for jackfruit that we're sourcing. We do source primarily from small farmers, meaning, well, specifically less than 5 acres. per farm majority. So I would say, we're from a logistics perspective and keeping everything efficient, like continuing to expand from the geographies where we are today. Um, but yeah, organic certification is difficult to do across a lot of small farms, as I know Rare is well familiar with, and we've gotten to have some conversations about. It's always great to have folks who are already organically certified. We've worked with our farmers to help them get organic certification. Um, but sourcing from a farmer who has a lot of jackfruit trees for some reason, it's like efficient logistically, and at the same time, it's maybe less of a impact from the aspect of trying to create significant added income for a farming family that would benefit enormously from that. So I think we don't particularly have exclusion criteria other than, one shouldn't be applying pesticides and things to the crop, but really where we're sourcing, no one is.
Awesome. Where does jackfruit grow? So you get most of yours from southern India. What is kind of the range of where you could even find native jackfruit? And this is a me question, not an audience
Yeah,
question. Sorry,
so
audience.
okay. Yeah, so jackfruit's native to India. And then it's also native to Sri Lanka, which is, of course, a small island off the southern tip of India. It is also considered a holy crop in India. It is the national crop of Bangladesh. And then it grows in certain parts of like East Africa, some parts of Latin America where it was in some parts of Latin America, it's considered an invasive species, so that's a little unfortunate. But it was brought over there by, of course, humans, and then some parts of Southeast Asia as well. So it's a semi-tropical crop.
Awesome. And who do you think, like, what are the best type of messengers to be effective in getting people to trial and continue eating plant-based meats in your view? And maybe who would be ineffective in your view?
And so you said messages or messengers?
Messengers. Like if you could
Messengers.
get anyone to
Hmm.
be championing, what types of people would you think would be best suited?
Interesting. Um, I mean, I would say probably folks who are seen as thought leaders in relation to like health and wellness, people who are thought leaders, and like when I say thought leaders, like people who already have influence over a large group of people, right? To be able to uh, like appeal based on the things that plant-based does deliver. I think like some of the celebrity endorsements, it's great, but a lot of them can seem a little inauthentic. And it's like, I look to this person for my advice on, what like, how I should train for this sport, or, that's maybe a bad example, but in some cases, it's like it's too disconnected from, the actual ask of like, you should eat more of this food. Um, so I think like also part of what is that we've seen when we look at like demographic trends for the category is that like, you know, Gen Z, like people who are concerned about the climate, like they're also some of the younger folk are more concerned as well about like doing what's cool. And so I do think that there is this aspect of like, how do you like make these types of foods cool and just like something that's not about sacrifice, right? I think that some of the messaging early on around plant-based was almost like, or meat alternatives is like you got to sacrifice for the benefit of the animals or sacrifice for the benefit of the planet, and it shouldn't be about sacrifice. Like you're signing up to like, when you're going to eat food for the day, like nobody's wanting to go into a moment of sacrifice or wanting to like enjoy it and have fun. So somebody who can kind of bring that to this space would be beneficial as well, particularly after the last couple of years where I think the messages have been pretty confusing.
Yeah, I totally agree on it's not about sacrifice. Yes, there's climate benefits, health benefits, but if you're not hitting taste and convenience and cost and kind of the things that people are most like top of mind when looking for food. I always think that chefs are really interesting messengers because you trust them to
Hmm.
care about taste more than anything else. Whereas, if someone is from the medical space, you trust them to be focused on health, but maybe they don't care as much about taste. So I'm always interested in like, how do you get the chefs to be using these things and making it feel like this is the tasty thing, not just the healthy or sustainable thing? Um, and you mentioned a little
Yep.
before with the plant-based meat space, there's so many different versions from quite natural products like yours to products that are really trying to mimic meat as closely as possible. How do you feel about the sometimes negative connotations of plant-based alternatives? And has like what's been deployed by alt meat brands helped or hurt willingness of consumers to switch to a more plant-forward product or diet?
Yeah. I think the fact that plant-based meat came in like a few years ago with really loud messaging around it bleeds like meat. Um, there's a bit of a backlash right now that maybe would have been avoidable. I think like the expectation was set really, really high of this is going to be just like meat, but it's plants, and so this, you can have your cake and eat it too. And I think the bar was set so high and so loudly, it's like created a stronger, amount of frustration than if the bar had not been set so high and so loudly. Because people, went in expecting it was going to be exactly like meat, but super pure plants, and that's like, again, the point of jackfruit is that it is naturally meaty. But that's not the case for other plants. And so, there are steps that it takes to get to a meaty texture, and certainly plants aren't naturally bleeding like meat. So I think like the messaging has kind of led to this current state of confusion of like, how are these products really made? How processed is it? Um, I do think that there's also this conversation around, well, what about just like shifting to having people eat more plants, right? And it's like health and like healthcare and medicine, and I like have a number of doctors with family like grew up in Rochester, Minnesota. Like the ask of change your behavior, just eat healthier, eat more plants, like that's really hard for people. So part of this space is about like how do we make plants like more accessible for people? Whether that's, buffalo cauliflower wings that hopefully weren't, fried in too bad of oil for too long, right? Like it's, let's get more plants, let's incrementally shift towards better. Um, but, consumers' expectations for what food is going to be like takes some time to change. Um, so I think, you know, where consumers are and how they're thinking about the category is very different today than where it was a few years ago, as people are now paying more attention to ingredients. And for I think the future of the category, I think that's a positive thing. Like it's just one stage in the cycle. It wasn't going to go on for forever that consumers weren't paying attention to how like what the ingredients were, or weren't asking the question of how it was made. So it's like one stage in the process. And I think the more that manufacturers can make clear to consumers that these are real plants, these are simple, and put out products where that is the case, the faster this category can, grow to being a solution that's widely accessible in the way that plant-based milk is.
Love that. And yeah, love your point about the incremental nature being really important. Like, don't wait for someone who might get to perfection or might do nothing at all, kind of give them steps to go along the way. And also what you were saying about kind of there's so many different products, people can now opt in to what they care about. So if they care more about natural, they can go jackfruit. If really what they ultimately want is to be a vegan, but eat a burger that is as similar as possible to what they ate when they were still eating meat, there's an option for them. If someone wants, there's more different ways that people can pick exactly what makes sense for them.
Yep.
Relating back to the question that we had from the audience about ideal messengers, how do you think about the role of the entertainment industry in the potential to shift diets to be more sustainable? Have you ever thought of joining a cooking show or being on some kind of thing in the entertainment space? Like, what is the role? What do you see as the ways that that can support this movement?
Yeah. No, I would love to do things like that. I think it's all, for us, like number of hours in a day, we're like such a mighty but such a lean team. Like there's just and that's where, I was having a conversation with somebody at lunch at Smashburger yesterday, and it's like it has taken a village to like get this company to today, and I absolutely know that it'll take a village to get this company to where we will be a year from now, 5 years from now. Like, and so, if there are opportunities through the network, that's probably how it would need to come to us to be able to do some kinds of partnerships with shows. But yeah, I think to the earlier point of like this needs to be something that is not a sacrifice, it needs to be something that's cool. And that's like the fun choice. And I think, one of the ways that that could come in is one of the things that we hear very often is that consumers bought our foods and they served it to their kids, they served it to their partner, they served it to the whole crew at the get together, and nobody knew it wasn't meat. And that's like fun. So that's one example of how it can be fun. But I think that that those kinds of opportunities would be great ways to help make it cool and fun.
Yeah, and you mentioned at the start, like Gen Z is really owning some of their food decisions, and it's exciting for them to kind of get more buying power over the next couple of years. I imagine like the kids that are growing up eating some of these plant-based alternatives, like that's going to be what they know. And when they come into purchasing food, it's not even going to be a switch. It's just going to be continuing what they've already been doing, which for me is very exciting. And so love
Yep.
thinking about, yeah, what parents are serving their kids in this space. Last question, and it's an ambitious one. How do you or have you gotten your products into sports stadiums, music venues, kind of some of those cool spots?
Yeah. So we are working on them. And yeah, it's, I would say, not that available yet. Some of those organizations have gotten a little accustomed to expecting like a large marketing spend in association with, putting anything on the menu. And, we're really focused on growing as efficiently as possible. So kind of going where there's a little bit more pull and less of an ask for investment. However, that's not the case with all of those kinds of venues, and they certainly are on the targets list. Um, like I said, if you know people, we'll take contacts. But yeah, those are great targets. Those
Awesome.
kinds of
So
places.
audience, your little homework. If anyone has any contacts in those spaces, get in touch with us and we'll get in touch with Annie. Wonderful. Well, this has been an amazing conversation. I mean, we were all over the place. Don't even know how to summarize, but loved everything you were talking about from the supplier side as well as the consumer side, and really the journey of how you got here and kind of looking from health. And I see that as really connecting through the whole time. You technically left public health, but in many ways you're still very much connected to that in the work you're doing. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Please follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter so you can hear about future conversations like this. And yeah, thank you so much, Annie. It was great chatting with you today.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.